You are completely useless. You can't do me anything, you hear me? Absolutely nothing.
She poured mud water on the old gateman, unaware he was the fiancé's father. She lifted the bucket and poured muddy water all over the old gateman's head. Not just a splash, not an accident, a full bucket, soaking his faded uniform, dripping down his wrinkled face, pooling at his worn-out shoes. He didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, humiliated at the gate he had guarded for years. She had just arrived at the mansion. Designer heels, red dress, a diamond ring sparkling in the sun, the soon-to-be bride of a wealthy family. To her, he was just a stubborn old man who forgot his place, a gateman who dared to question her tone, a poor, powerless nobody. She didn't know someone was watching from the balcony. She didn't know a phone was recording everything, and she definitely didn't know the truth. The quiet old man she just disgraced was not just a gateman. He was the owner of the house, the father of the man she planned to marry. And by sunset, her wedding, her reputation, and her future would all hang on one question. Was this cruelty or character? Before we continue this amazing story, please subscribe to this channel now, like this video and comment below where you are watching from and what time it is in your country. Now let's see what happened next. She swung the bucket without hesitation, and the muddy water crashed over the old man's head like a verdict already decided. The splash echoed against the tall iron gate, brown streaks sliding down his gray hair, dripping from his chin, soaking into his faded uniform. Drivers froze mid-step. A gardener stopped trimming the hedge. Even the air felt heavy, thick with embarrassment. She lowered the empty bucket slowly, breathing hard, her red heels planted like she had just won something. But the silence that followed did not feel like victory. It felt like something dangerous waking up. She stepped closer, chin lifted, her eyes sharp with entitlement, staring at the old man as if daring him to react. Mud pooled around his shoes, darkening the concrete beneath him. He blinked once, water running into the wrinkles beside his eyes, but he did not wipe his face. He did not shout. He did not defend himself. That stillness spread unease through the watching staff. Because sometimes when a man refuses to fight back, it is not weakness. Sometimes it is control, and control means he knows something you don't. She turned away first, flicking invisible dirt from her red dress as though she had cleaned the problem instead of created one. The diamond on her finger caught the afternoon sun, flashing bright enough to hurt the eyes. This mansion was about to be hers. This gate would soon open because of her name. In her mind, discipline was necessary. Respect had to be demanded. If you allowed workers to forget their place, they would climb over you. That was the rule she had lived by. But what if the rule was wrong today? He reached slowly for the small chain at the gate and adjusted it back into position with steady hands. The metal clinked softly, deliberate and calm. No trembling, no anger, just order restored. A young security guard shifted awkwardly nearby, clearly unsure whether to step in or stay silent. The old man gave him a subtle look, one that said enough without words. Authority, quiet but undeniable, hung around him like an invisible coat. And that was the first crack in her assumption, because gatekeepers do not usually command that kind of respect. She checked her phone, unaware that another phone had already begun recording from above. A balcony curtain moved slightly, just enough to expose a lens watching everything. The red dress, the muddy uniform, the frozen witnesses, evidence sealed in digital silence. In today's world, humiliation travels faster than apology. But she laughed lightly, brushing off the tension as if it were nothing. She believed moments like this disappeared with time. She did not know this one had just been preserved permanently. He finally lifted his eyes and looked at her fully. Not with hatred, not even with disappointment, but with something heavier. Evaluation. As if he had been given the answer to a question he had quietly been asking for weeks. His gaze did not chase her as she walked toward the mansion doors. It stayed steady, thoughtful, resolved. That look would mean nothing to her now. But later, when everything shifted, she would remember it. And she would wish she had understood it sooner. She walked through the grand entrance smiling, unaware that behind her the gate clicked shut with a soft, final sound. The old man locked it carefully, wiping none of the mud from his face. The staff slowly returned to movement, but the mood had changed. Something invisible had been decided. Pride had made a move. Silence had answered it. And somewhere inside that mansion, a truth waited patiently for the right moment to step forward. The question was no longer what she had done. The question was, what would happen next? She stood before the full-length mirror inside the guest suite, smoothing her red dress as if it were armor. The fabric hugged her frame perfectly, bold and unapologetic, the kind of dress that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. Gold earrings brushed her neck. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled like a trophy. She inhaled slowly, studying her reflection with the satisfaction of someone who believed she had finally arrived. This mansion, these marble floors, this life, it all felt earned. But beneath the confidence, something restless flickered in her eyes. She adjusted her heels and walked across the polished floor, each step sharp and controlled. She had grown up watching doors close in her face, watching people with softer voices and richer parents move ahead while she struggled. She had promised herself she would never be small again, never ignored, never disrespected. Power, she learned early, was the only language the world truly respected. And if that meant being firm, harsh even, so be it. But when did firmness quietly become cruelty? She opened the curtains wide and stared down at the compound below, spotting the gate in the distance. Staff moved carefully around the property, each one focused, disciplined. This was how things should be: order, structure, clear lines. In her mind, the old gateman had crossed one. He had questioned her tone, hesitated before opening the gate earlier that afternoon. That pause had felt like defiance, and defiance to her required correction. But why had his silence unsettled her more than an argument would have? She picked up her phone and scrolled through congratulatory messages from friends who envied her new life. Photos from engagement parties filled her screen. Champagne glasses, laughter, designer handbags, comments praising her luck, her glow, her upgrade. She smiled at the word upgrade. It echoed in her chest like proof. She was stepping into a higher class now, a better circle, the kind where people like gatekeepers faded into the background. Yet something about that old man's eyes kept replaying in her mind, uninvited. She walked into the hallway and passed two housemaids who instantly lowered their gazes. Their silence followed her like a shadow. She liked that silence. It meant control. It meant she mattered. But it also felt heavier today, less natural, almost cautious. The energy in the house had shifted since the incident at the gate. Whispers traveled without sound. She sensed it but refused to acknowledge it. After all, she was the bride-to-be. What could possibly threaten that position? She paused at the top of the staircase, running her fingers along the smooth wooden railing. Her fiancé adored her confidence. He admired her boldness. He once called her fearless. She believed that completely. Fearless meant never apologizing for protecting your status. Fearless meant standing tall even when others shrank. Yet fearlessness can blur into blindness. And blindness makes people miss warning signs placed right in front of them. She lifted her chin again and walked toward the grand living room, unaware that her definition of power was already being measured by someone far more experienced. The mansion was not just a home, it was a test, and today she had unknowingly submitted her answers. She believed the wedding was days away, guaranteed, locked in like the diamond on her finger. But outside, beyond the marble walls and luxury cars, something was quietly shifting. And the real question was no longer about status. It was about character. He stood alone at the gate long after the echoes of the splash had faded, muddy water drying slowly against his skin under the warm afternoon sun. Flies hovered, drawn to the dampness, but he did not swat them away. His hands rested behind his back, posture straight as if nothing had happened. Anyone watching closely would notice the discipline in that stillness. This was not the posture of a broken man. It was the posture of someone who had learned patience the hard way, and patience, when tested, often reveals hidden depth. He reached for a clean cloth from the small wooden stool beside the gate and folded it carefully, not to wipe his face, but to clean the metal latch. Mud smeared onto his fingers, yet he worked slowly, deliberately, restoring order to the gate before tending to himself. That choice said everything. He believed in hierarchy, yes, but one rooted in responsibility, not arrogance. Staff passing by slowed their steps unconsciously, offering him quiet nods of respect they did not give easily. Why did a mere gateman command that kind of silent acknowledgement? He resumed his routine, pacing the length of the gate with measured steps, checking hinges, scanning the road beyond the fence. Years of repetition had carved confidence into his movements. He had watched children grow into adults here, watched fortunes rise and fall, watched marriages begin and collapse. This gate was not just his post, it was a vantage point. And today, from that vantage point, he had seen something important, something that could not be ignored. A gardener hesitated nearby, clearly torn between sympathy and fear. The old man gave a small, reassuring nod without looking directly at him, a gesture that eased the tension immediately. It was subtle, practiced, almost instinctive. Leaders do not always announce themselves. Some lead through calm, some through consistency, and some through the ability to absorb humiliation without losing themselves. That kind of strength unsettles people more than anger ever could. He finally lifted the cloth and wiped his face slowly, revealing eyes that were sharp, observant, and far too steady for someone supposedly powerless. There was no bitterness in them, no thirst for revenge, only assessment, as if he had just witnessed the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. For weeks, he had been watching quietly, listening more than speaking, allowing events to reveal truths naturally. And now, one truth had made itself very clear. He turned slightly and glanced toward the mansion, its white walls glowing under the sun. Many believed wealth was built in boardrooms and sealed with signatures. He knew better. Wealth, real wealth, was built through discipline, values, and tests that most people never realized they were taking. He had designed this test carefully. A simple one. How do you treat someone you believe has no power over you? Today, the answer had been delivered loudly, even without words. He reached into his pocket and felt the familiar weight of a small object resting there. Not money, not keys, something symbolic, something earned long before today. He did not pull it out. There was no rush. Timing mattered. Justice delivered too early often teaches nothing. He preferred lessons that arrived when pride was at its peak, when the fall would be felt fully. As the sun dipped slightly lower, he locked the gate once more and took a slow breath. The mud on his uniform had dried, but the moment itself was far from over. Inside the mansion, preparations continued, laughter echoed, confidence bloomed. Outside, a decision had already been made. He was no longer just observing, he was waiting. And when he finally stepped forward, silence would no longer protect anyone. He walked away from the gate at sunset, leaving another guard to take over, and moved toward the servants' quarters with the slow confidence of someone who owned more than he showed. The sky burned orange above the mansion's white pillars, casting long shadows across the courtyard. From the outside, the house looked like a symbol of success. 3 floors, glass balconies, imported stone. But foundations tell deeper stories than paint ever can. And this mansion had been built on years of sacrifice, discipline, and quiet tests no guest ever noticed. He entered a modest private room tucked behind the east wing, closed the door, and removed the faded uniform carefully, unfolding it with precision. Beneath the worn fabric was a crisp white shirt, tailored perfectly, hidden all day like a secret waiting for air. He washed the dried mud from his face slowly, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The wrinkles were real. The gray hair was real. But so was the authority behind his eyes. He had not worn that uniform out of necessity. He had worn it as a filter. He stepped into a small office attached to the quarters, a space no one except trusted staff knew about. Framed certificates lined the wall, business awards, charity recognitions, decades of leadership etched in gold. Photographs showed him shaking hands with governors, launching companies, standing beside his son at graduation. The contrast between those frames and the muddy humiliation from hours earlier felt almost unreal. Yet this contrast was intentional. Wealth reveals nothing about character. Tests do. He sat at a heavy wooden desk and opened a leather folder containing estate documents and inheritance plans. His son's future was secure. The family business was stable, but marriage was not just romance. Marriage was partnership. He had always believed that the person who joins your family must respect its roots, not just its riches. So he had stepped back months ago, choosing to observe quietly. He needed to see how she treated drivers, cooks, cleaners. Today, the gate had answered that question. He leaned back in his chair and replayed the moment in his mind. Not the mud, not the splash, but the look in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. The certainty that she could act without consequence. That belief frightened him more than the insult itself, because arrogance without correction grows bold, and bold arrogance poisons families from the inside. He had built this mansion brick by brick. He would not let pride crack its foundation. He picked up his phone and opened a message thread from someone upstairs. A short video thumbnail glowed on the screen, the incident already captured from the balcony. He did not press play. He did not need to. The truth did not require replay. It required response, but response must be timed carefully. Exposure in private teaches little. Exposure in truth teaches everything. Tonight's family dinner would provide the right stage. He stood and adjusted his white shirt. The transformation nearly complete. The uniform lay folded neatly on the table like a discarded disguise. Outside, laughter drifted from the main hall where wedding plans were being discussed. She believed the biggest event of her life was approaching. In reality, something far more decisive was coming first. He turned off the office light and stepped into the hallway quietly. By nightfall, the mansion would not feel the same, and neither would she. The dining hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers as family members gathered around the long mahogany table. Silverware reflected warm light, glasses chimed softly, and the scent of roasted spices filled the air. Conversations overlapped. Wedding venues, guest lists, honeymoon destinations. She sat confidently beside his son, radiant in a silk dress, laughter effortless, posture relaxed. Across the table, an empty chair waited at the head. No one questioned it. They assumed the old man at the gate would, as always, remain invisible tonight. Then the double doors opened. Footsteps echoed slowly against polished marble. Conversations thinned, then dissolved entirely. The man who entered was not wearing a faded uniform. He wore a tailored white shirt beneath a dark jacket, posture commanding, expression calm. The transformation was undeniable. Servants straightened instantly. His son stood halfway from his seat in confusion. And her smile, bright seconds earlier, stiffened as recognition crashed into realization. The silent gateman walked to the head of the table and took the empty chair. No one spoke. He folded his napkin neatly across his lap before lifting his eyes to meet hers. There was no anger in his gaze, no theatrical fury, only clarity. "Before we discuss wedding arrangements," he began evenly, voice deeper than she remembered. "We need to discuss something that happened at the gate this afternoon." The words landed softly but carried weight. The room felt smaller. His son glanced between them, bewildered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound formed. He continued, measured and precise. "Today, someone tested our family values, not with contracts, not with money, but with behavior." A remote clicked softly in his hand. Behind him, a large screen flickered to life. The courtyard appeared. The puddle. The splash. By her laughter. Every detail played in silence. No dramatic music, no commentary, just truth. Gasps rippled across the table. His son's face drained of color as understanding settled heavily over him. When the video ended, he turned off the screen and faced her fully. "Power," he said quietly, "is revealed in how we treat those who cannot defend themselves." His tone never rose, yet each word cut deeper than anger could. "I wore that uniform to observe, not because I needed the job. I needed clarity." He let the sentence breathe. "And today I received it." The room remained frozen, tension thick enough to feel. Tears welled in her eyes, not dramatic, but shaken. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice trembling. "I thought—" She stopped, unable to finish. He nodded gently. "Exactly," he replied. "You thought there would be no consequence." The silence that followed was not cruel. It was instructive. His son finally found his voice, asking softly, "Father, why didn't you tell us?" The old man's gaze softened briefly toward him. "Because some truths must reveal themselves." He stood slowly, hands resting against the polished table. "Marriage into this family is not about wealth. It is about character. We can forgive mistakes, but we cannot ignore patterns." His eyes returned to her, steady but not merciless. "You have an opportunity tonight, not to apologize to me, but to understand what kind of person you wish to become." The decision hung in the air like a suspended verdict. The chandeliers glowed quietly overhead as no one dared interrupt. Outside, the gate stood locked, silent under the moonlight. Inside, something far more important than a wedding plan was unfolding. Whether the engagement would continue was no longer the central question. The real question was deeper. Could humility replace pride? The old man had revealed his identity. Now, she would have to reveal hers. From the shadowed balcony above the courtyard, a phone hummed quietly, perched on the stone railing like a silent sentinel. Its camera had captured every detail of the humiliation. The splash, the mud, the way her heels clicked sharply as she backed away, satisfied. The light from the screen illuminated the witness's face, just enough to reveal a mix of concern and satisfaction. This was not revenge. This was evidence. In today's world, the line between private cruelty and public judgment had blurred, and someone had chosen to record truth rather than react in anger. The angle was perfect. Every observer in the courtyard, every vehicle parked along the drive, every servant who dared glance upward was framed in context. Her arrogance had been monumental. The red dress, the diamond ring, the sharp, commanding gestures, all perfectly documented. And while she believed her act had gone unseen beyond those walls, technology and timing had conspired differently. The hum of the phone's processor was the quiet heartbeat of justice, invisible yet inevitable. Soon, the consequences would no longer be optional. Wind ruffled papers on the balcony ledge, and the observer adjusted the device carefully, ensuring nothing obscured the view. The old man's silence at the gate, his calm acceptance of mud dripping down his face, contrasted sharply with the frenetic energy captured in her movements. Pride, when displayed publicly, is a spectacle. Humility, when observed privately, is revelation. The footage would not embellish. It would not exaggerate. It would speak louder than any voice, leaving room for interpretation but no room for denial. A servant passed below, murmuring a greeting that floated upward in the evening air. The witness shifted slightly, careful not to be seen, yet aware that every subtle movement was being mirrored in the shadows. The recording was more than visual proof. It was psychological leverage. Even unseen, the knowledge of being observed has a power of its own. And tonight, the observer knew that the events at the gate were about to intersect with an entirely different stage. The dinner, the introductions, the family, the judgment. The camera caught the glint of sunlight on her ring as she turned to leave the gate, unaware. Each movement, each confident step away from the old man was catalogued. The observer's heart thudded in anticipation. Moments like this rarely repeated themselves. They were instantaneous tests of character, snapshots of human nature laid bare, and what she believed was her power was already slipping through her fingers, recorded meticulously to be revealed at a time when the lesson would be unavoidable. A soft creak on the balcony startled the witness briefly, but focus returned instantly. Nothing could compromise the evidence now. Timing was everything. A video released too early could inflame. A video released too late could miss its impact. The plan was patience. Justice, after all. It is most effective when the moment of revelation lands hardest, when assumptions are shattered and pride collapses without warning. Tonight, everything had been perfectly captured, stored, and timed for maximum effect. As the sun set behind the mansion, painting the white walls golden orange, the phone's screen reflected that same warm glow. The observer finally leaned back, satisfied, eyes scanning the horizon where city lights were beginning to flicker on. Silence was a gift, and patience a tool. The witness knew that by the time the family dinner began, the truth from the gate would arrive in full force, unstoppable and undeniable. The stage was set, and no one, not even the bride in red, was ready for what was coming. The old man's hands lingered on the cold iron latch, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a symbol of decision. The courtyard was empty now, the splashes of mud drying in the late afternoon sun. Birds chirped faintly from the gatepost, all oblivious to human pride and failure. He breathed slowly, steadying himself. Humiliation had been inflicted, but justice was not yet delivered. Closing the gate was not retreat. It was authority in motion, a signal that the balance had shifted. Every choice from this point would echo far beyond these walls. He turned the key in the lock with deliberate calm, hearing the metallic click resonate like a judge's gavel. The gate had been both stage and witness. To open it too soon, to confront her immediately, would be to act hastily. Instead, he chose patience. Karma, after all, was a teacher who rarely rushed. The young woman believed her power had ended the old man's day. In truth, her actions had only begun the chain of consequences. Silence now carried more weight than words could ever summon. From the edge of the courtyard, a maid paused mid-step, noticing the gate's slow swing to closed. She understood without explanation. Discipline, restraint, and dignity were at play. The old man's quiet control contrasted sharply with the earlier spectacle of her triumph. Power revealed itself most effectively when unnoticed, when subtle. His son's future wife would soon understand this, though not tonight. The lock's final turn was symbolic, the transition from offense to reckoning, from arrogance to accountability. He stepped back and surveyed the courtyard, now still and empty save for drying mud puddles glinting in the waning sunlight. The air carried faint scents of wet earth and polished stone, mingling strangely with the fragrance of her perfume that lingered despite the chaos. Each droplet, each stain, was a mark of pride mismanaged. But he would not act out of anger. The gate had closed not in punishment, but as a threshold. On one side, pride, on the other, revelation. His mind moved forward to the evening ahead. Dinner, introductions, social expectations, all of them would soon collide with the truth of what had occurred. He did not need dramatics or confrontation. The mansion itself, layered in secrecy, had always been a test of character. Tonight would simply complete it. The old man's silence became a weapon of inevitability, a force more compelling than any accusation. The lesson would arrive on its own, and when it did, pride would feel its full weight. He folded the uniform with precision and set it aside. Being careful not to wrinkle a single crease. Every act was intentional, every movement deliberate. The old man understood the art of patience better than most understood urgency. By stepping back, he let natural consequence unfold. She believed victory had been hers in the courtyard. Soon she would see that the true test had only begun. Authority, when exercised with wisdom, does not shout. It waits, observes, and lands at the precise moment that cannot be ignored. Finally, while he straightened his shoulders and walked away from the gate, leaving it closed, silent, and immovable. In that stillness lay power greater than anger or retribution. The mansion would witness what he had already decided, and when the evening unfolded, every gesture, every word, every expectation would reveal the outcome. The seed of reversal had been planted quietly, like the last stone in a foundation, and soon the structure of her arrogance would crumble under the weight of revealed truth. The stage was ready. Only the audience awaited. The dining hall glowed in amber light as chandeliers reflected softly off polished floors and crystal glassware. The long table was perfectly set, silver cutlery aligned, fine china gleaming, linens crisp. Guests murmured, their voices gentle but edged with curiosity. She entered first, heels clicking like a metronome, red dress flowing with authority. Her confidence radiated, a mask carefully maintained. Every glance she received was met with a polished smile, but beneath it, an undercurrent of tension rippled, an instinct she could not yet name. Something unseen waited, biding its time. The air smelled of roasted meats, fresh bread, and a hint of perfume mingled with candle wax. Laughter punctuated conversation, but subtle glances darted her way. Every handshake, every nod, carried unspoken assessment. She perched at her fiancé's side, posture straight, chin high, eyes sweeping the room as if it belonged to her. Servants passed quietly, plates moving with ritualistic precision. Yet beneath the ceremony, she sensed that the rules had shifted subtly. Power was never absolute, and tonight, patience held more force than arrogance. The old man was absent from the gate. The courtyard, silent and empty, contrasted sharply with the chatter inside. No one knew he had already closed it, already chosen the moment of revelation. Meanwhile, whispers among the staff and distant cousins hinted at unspoken knowledge. A maid cast a furtive glance upward, toward where cameras might catch unnoticed details. Every movement was observed now, every gesture catalogued. The mansion itself seemed to lean in, waiting for what was to come, its walls heavy with history and secrets too long buried. Her fiancé smiled beside her, attempting to ease tension she hadn't yet recognized. He offered polite conversation, hands gentle on hers, yet even he carried the shadow of expectation. Family members exchanged subtle signals, brief looks of surprise and recognition at the weight of what had happened at the gate. The hall, illuminated by candlelight, suddenly seemed smaller. Shadows lengthened across their faces, exaggerating the subtle cracks in her composure. Every second stretched, drawing her toward an inevitable truth she could not yet perceive. The servants moved like ghosts between chairs and plates, silently witnessing every nuance of posture and expression. She sipped from her crystal glass, the cold weight of it grounding her, unaware that her power had shifted. Outside, the locked gate was a silent witness, its authority invisible but palpable. Each passing moment deepened the tension, a quiet drumbeat that echoed in her chest. She believed tonight was hers to command, yet every element of the scene, the shadows, the murmurs, the poised elegance, was conspiring to reveal a force beyond her control. A flicker of movement caught her eye from the far corner of the room. A tall, composed figure entering quietly through the side door. The hall hushed instantly, though no one called attention. The figure's presence carried gravity, a calm authority that contrasted with the polished rituals of the meal. He did not rush, did not make spectacle, but the room shifted as if the air itself acknowledged him. Every guest straightened imperceptibly, every conversation faltered. She followed him instinctively, curiosity pricking at her confidence, sensing that the evening was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. By the time he approached the head of the table, silence had fully settled. Candles flickered, shadows stretching long and deep across ornate walls. She felt the first tremor of fear, subtle but insistent. The man paused, surveying the gathering calmly, eyes finally resting on hers. Time seemed to slow, every glance magnified, every heartbeat amplified. The room awaited the reveal she could not yet grasp, the weight of truth poised like a silent hammer. And in that suspended moment, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, preparing for the lesson about to unfold. The side doors of the dining hall opened with a quiet, deliberate creak, and the old man stepped in. Gone was the faded uniform, the mud-streaked dignity. In its place, a tailored suit that spoke of authority without arrogance. Every eye turned, some slowly, some wide with disbelief. The room fell into near silence, broken only by the soft scrape of chairs and the distant hum of chandeliers. She froze mid-step, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her heart raced, a cold realization creeping through her veins. This was the same man she had humiliated at the gate. He walked with calm precision, each step measured, deliberate, that his presence commanding without force. The red dress at the table now felt out of place, too bright against the weight of authority entering the room. Guests whispered, glances darting nervously from his composed figure to the flustered bride-to-be. Her fiancé rose slowly, a quiet pride in his posture, and spoke 2 words that detonated the room. "Meet my father." Time seemed to slow, the chandelier's reflections flickering over stunned faces, each droplet of light illuminating the cracks in her perfect world. Her blood ran cold as recognition finally clicked. The mud, the humiliation, the silent authority at the gate. It had all belonged to him. Her mind raced in panic, desperately seeking an escape that didn't exist. The people she had dismissed, the man she had mocked, was not just a gatekeeper, not just a servant. He was the patriarch, the source of wealth, influence, and judgment. Every smile she had offered, every glance she had demanded now felt grotesque, a mockery of her own arrogance. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering, their eyes wide and judgmental. Staff who had watched silently at the gate now exchanged glances, understanding the symmetry of the moment. The power dynamics had inverted completely, and she was at the mercy of her own recklessness. The old man's gaze was calm, unreadable, yet filled with quiet evaluation. Every inch of him radiated authority. Every gesture reminded her that humiliation can be delivered silently, without words, without raised voices. She had finally stepped onto a stage far larger than the courtyard gate. A soft exhale swept through the room, barely audible, as if the mansion itself were processing the revelation. Her fiancé's hand lingered on hers, steadying but not rescuing. She realized in that moment that social status, wealth, and polished appearances could only shield arrogance for so long. Character, or the lack of it, had been revealed in broad daylight. Every smug smile, every sense of superiority, every dismissive motion had been captured, both in memory and in unseen cameras, ready to testify to her failure. Her knees felt weak, the polished marble floor reflecting her distorted image. She looked at the father again, noting the faint lines of age, the depth in his eyes, the subtle control of posture that demanded respect. he had chosen not to humiliate her directly. Yet the revelation itself was sharper than any public slap. Shock and panic intermingled in her chest, the warmth of her confidence evaporating into a cold, sinking realization. She had been given a test and failed spectacularly without anyone having to raise a voice. The room remained still, every observer absorbing the gravity of the reveal. Silence was louder than shouts. Every heartbeat seemed amplified. Her mind spun, questions flashing. How could she recover? Could her fiancé still respect her? Could anyone forgive such arrogance? The old man's measured calm contrasted with her inner chaos, his silent authority reminding everyone present that respect is earned, not demanded. And as the chandeliers cast their golden light, the lesson was clear. One act of cruelty can define a lifetime if the target of that cruelty is someone far above you. Her phone vibrated incessantly in her clutch, notifications flooding like a storm she hadn't anticipated. Videos of the courtyard incident were already circulating. Neighbors, staff, and even delivery drivers had captured her humiliation in sharp, unflinching detail. Her red dress, once a symbol of dominance, now glowed like a warning sign in every clip. Every splash of mud, every expression of disdain she'd worn was replayed endlessly. Heart pounding, she realized the private moment she thought was confined to the gate had become a public spectacle. Panic gripped her chest like iron. What would the world think? Whispers followed her through the dining hall, subtle but merciless. Eyes that had once admired her sparkle now flicked with judgment. The guests leaned into each other, exchanging nods, tiny shakes of the head. Her fiancé's pride, once unwavering, now faltered under the weight of collective observation. Even the youngest cousins, who had barely been aware of protocol moments ago, now understood the imbalance that had occurred. Her carefully curated image of power and grace felt fragile, cracking beneath the gaze of everyone present. Every glance threatened to unmask the truth of her arrogance. Outside the mansion, the video had already begun its digital journey, shared among extended family, friends, and even local social media channels. Her name, her red dress, the bucket, the mud, they became symbols of recklessness and entitlement. The walls she had built around herself, wealth, status, and appearance, offered no protection. Panic morphed into fear, sharp and biting as she imagined the conversations buzzing across smartphones she could not see. The world was witnessing her misstep, and the consequences were no longer theoretical. Humiliation had transformed into a living, breathing entity. Inside, staff exchanged knowing looks, subtle but loaded with meaning. The same hands that had carried trays now clutched phones or adjusted silverware nervously, was aware of the story unfolding beyond the dining hall. Even the seasoned household manager, who had navigated decades of etiquette and discretion, felt the shift in power. The old man's silence at the gate, once incomprehensible, now felt like a masterstroke. The lesson was unfolding quietly, elegantly, yet with an undeniable force. Pride, unchecked, had become the very mechanism of its own undoing. She caught her reflection in the polished silverware, face drained, eyes wide, posture stiff. For the first time, the weight of public judgment pressed on her chest. She had wielded humiliation like a weapon, but the weapon had bounced back with exponential force. Her social standing, meticulously built over years of presentation and ambition, now felt precarious. Every moment she had spent asserting dominance over those she deemed beneath her now magnified the scale of her collapse. The sensation of exposure, of being watched and judged, ignited a panic that refused to abate. Her fiancé's gaze was steady but tinged with unease. He observed the unfolding digital storm, aware that reputation could crumble faster than wealth could build it. His hands rested lightly on hers, offering grounding, yet his silence reminded her that forgiveness and trust were not guaranteed. Every heartbeat in that room echoed the stakes she had ignored at the gate. The lesson of karma and life reversal was in motion, undeniable and irreversible. What she had seen as trivial, the old man's quiet dignity, was the beginning of a reckoning that extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. By sunset, the courtyard's mud had dried, but the stain on her reputation was wet and glaring. Messages, calls, social media posts, every channel carried reminders of her arrogance. Humiliation, once private, had transformed into a public narrative, and she was powerless to stop it. Panic twisted in her stomach as she realized the depth of her misjudgment. Pride, once a shield, now revealed the fragility beneath her polished exterior. And in that moment, she understood fully. The consequences of cruelty reach far beyond the immediate scene, touching hearts, eyes, and reputations in ways no one can escape. The gate loomed before her, the same wrought iron that had witnessed her arrogance weeks ago. She approached cautiously, heels swapped for flat shoes, red dress replaced by muted tones. Her hands trembled slightly, clasped tightly as if holding herself together. The courtyard smelled of earth and old stone, familiar yet now intimidating. Memories of mud splashing down the old man's face replayed in her mind like a merciless loop. Each step toward the gate was heavier than the last. She realized that the world she thought she controlled had shifted. Now she was not the bride in command. She was the supplicant. The old man stood silently, as if he had been waiting. His uniform had long since returned to its ceremonial polish, the mud stains nothing more than a distant memory. Yet his presence carried an authority that demanded recognition. No harsh words, no raised voice, only the weight of history, dignity, and patience. Every gesture he made, from the slight tilt of his head to the calm placement of his hands, reminded her that power can exist without arrogance. And in that silence, she felt the sting of humility she had so carelessly ignored. She knelt, almost instinctively, at the foot of the gate. Her eyes sought forgiveness, her pride scattered among the pebbles beneath her hands. The staff who had watched silently before now observed openly, a quiet chorus of witnesses. Some shook their heads, some offered sympathetic glances, but none judged too harshly. They had seen the arc of consequence unfold as naturally as the setting sun. Every detail, the gate, the courtyard, the silent figure before her, was a mirror of the scene she had orchestrated weeks ago, now reversed. Her mind raced with fragmented thoughts. How could she have been so blind? How had she thought that humiliation was hers to give? She remembered the videos circulating online, the whispers that had followed her through family gatherings, and the slow realization that social standing meant little when moral character was on trial. The same hands that once flung mud now pressed together in silent plea. The lesson was painfully clear. Arrogance invites reversal, and respect must be earned, not demanded. The old man finally spoke, though his voice was calm, measured, and lacking judgment. He reminded her, in tone if not in words, that forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. Every syllable felt like both a balm and a test, ours gauging her sincerity. She responded with bows, small, repeated gestures, trying to convey remorse she had only begun to understand. Each motion, each glance, was an offering, a fragile thread connecting regret to potential redemption. Yet she knew that even genuine apology could not erase the spectacle she had caused. Sunlight streaked the courtyard as the mansion's walls caught golden highlights, reflecting her vulnerable position. The quiet hum of distant traffic and birdsong contrasted sharply with the thrum of panic in her chest. She realized, painfully, that her life had been redirected by a single act of cruelty, and that the gate was now both a literal and symbolic boundary. She was no longer an invader of authority. She was a visitor seeking entry into a world where character mattered more than wealth or appearance. The final moments at the gate felt suspended in time. She looked up at him, hope mingling with fear, was knowing that redemption was not guaranteed. His gaze held patience, judgment, and possibility, all at once. She had learned at last the price of pride unchecked and cruelty wielded without thought. And though the courtyard remained the same, she knew the world had shifted. Today she had begun the slow, uncertain journey from arrogance to humility, from spectacle to sincerity, and perhaps from shame to redemption. The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the mansion's courtyard. She stood still, the weight of the day pressing down like stone. Her red dress no longer glowed. Even the diamonds seemed muted under the golden haze. Every reflection in the polished marble reminded her of the arrogance she had carried and the consequences she now faced. Around her, life moved as usual, staff tidying, servants whispering, guests lingering. But inside her chest, a storm of regret and fear raged. She realized, finally, that moments of cruelty define not just others' perception, but the very measure of oneself. Inside, the old man observed quietly from his study, the flickering light of a desk lamp illuminating his calm face. His hands rested on the polished wood, unmoving, yet every line in his posture radiated authority. He reflected on what had unfolded, the choice between revealing her folly immediately or letting her face the weight naturally. Character, he thought. It reveals itself in small moments and in grand ones alike. Humility cannot be taught through force. It must be discovered. And so, he let the day's events serve as their own lesson. The fiancé walked slowly beside her, the quiet weight of observation in his eyes. Love had been challenged, principles tested. He understood the heart of the lesson his father had orchestrated without words. What had seemed like cruelty was a mirror, a reflection of her true nature, unchecked by accountability or empathy. Every glance she had thrown at the gate, every snap of condescension had been captured, now forming a narrative she could no longer control. And in that truth, he found clarity, and she found fear. Whispers from the courtyard, once a distant nuisance, now echoed in her mind with sharpened clarity. Community judgment had arrived, not as gossip, but as proof of a moral law at work. The viral video, the hushed comments, the raised eyebrows at family gatherings, all underscored one principle: status without character is fragile, and cruelty without consequence is an illusion. She had wielded power carelessly, assuming obedience and invisibility. Now she understood that every action towards someone beneath her rippled far beyond the immediate moment. She sank to a bench near the fountain, water glinting as it caught the last sunlight. Her hands trembled as she realized the enormity of her misjudgment. Forgiveness was not guaranteed. Redemption was a long, uncertain path. Every echo of laughter, every glance of the old man or her fiancé reminded her that life's lessons are often crueler than any punishment. She felt a weight in her chest, a mix of guilt, humility, and the beginnings of insight. Pride had fractured. Now introspection was the only bridge back to dignity. The mansion, with all its grandeur and beauty, seemed transformed. The walls whispered of lessons learned, of character revealed, of power balanced with restraint. She noticed for the first time the subtle ways authority could exist without arrogance, influence without cruelty. The quiet dignity of the old man, the patient pride of her fiancé, the measured glances of the household staff, they all formed a tapestry that demanded respect. She had arrived at a crossroads: continue clinging to ego or accept the lesson and allow herself to grow. As night fell, the courtyard lights flickered on, bathing the space in soft gold. She looked at the gate, at the old man, and at the life she had almost destroyed with a single thoughtless act. Cruelty and character, she realized, are defined in moments both small and grand. The world watches, and the heart knows the difference. And in that quiet realization, the seeds of redemption took root. Pride could crumble, humility could rise, and one life-altering act could teach a lifetime's worth of moral clarity. The question remained, would she choose growth or cling to what had already betrayed her?